Leader Gable, my good friend and co-JCAR member from Chicago brought this up earlier, but I'd like to bring your attention to several specific parts of the bill, Amendment 3, please. On page 75, line 14, the bill discusses the issuance of emergency rules. Can you explain to me how that is specifically going to work in the context of this bill? Please.
Sure. This language will allow the governor and the Department of Healthcare and Family Services to contain the costs of the program so that it will not impact any other program.
Through the issuance of emergency rules. Okay, the Illinois Administrative Procedures Act has strict requirements for the issuance of emergency rules. And down on lines 22 or thereabouts, it says that General Assembly finds that the adoption of rules to implement the change made by this amendatory act of the 103rd General Assembly is deemed an emergency and necessary for the public interest, safety, and welfare. Those are the requirements that are in the IAPA. Would you explain to me what we're talking about here? Are we talking about the public interest? Are we talking about public safety? Or are we talking about the public welfare? Which one of it is it?
I think all of them.
In what way?
Well, I think the part that you're talking about is to be able to implement all of the rates that we talked about.
Implement
earlier.
the rates to do what?
The rates to the increased rates for psychiatric care, for the hospitals.
Let's cut to the chase here, ma'am. We're talking about what we have comfortably come to understand as being a $1.1 billion cost to cover undocumented people in this state. That's the specific part of this emergency rulemaking that I would like you to address.
Oh. Okay. I think I'm looking at a different part of the language.
I just quoted it to you. It's on page 75 of Amendment 3. And also on page 358, but there's a different bit in there that we'll talk about in a moment.
Yeah, I think the emergency language speaks for itself.
No, it doesn't. I'm asking you a question. What part of what we're trying to do here to provide coverage to undocumented people in this state rises to the level of an emergency that needs to be administered through the issuance of emergency rules by this governor?
Well, the rulemaking can take quite a long time, and there are concerns that if we continue to wait, that we won't be able to contain the cost of the program, which is the whole purpose of the rulemaking.
So it can be, well, let's go to page 358 of the bill. I think it's section 150, section E, as in echo.
That's this part.
We talk about, in order to provide for the expeditious and effective ongoing implementation of this section, the department may adopt rules through the use of emergency rulemaking in accordance with section 5.45 of the IAPA, except that the limitation on the number of emergency rules that may be adopted in the 24-month period shall not apply. Would you explain to me what motivates what motivated that language?
The concern that as we're monitoring this program, that there may be times when we need to change the rules more often than within one 24-month period.
Do you understand the fact that when emergency rules are issued, that after the expiration of that 150-day period within which those rules are in effect, there is a 2-year moratorium on issuing new emergency rules under the IAPA?
Yeah, yes.
And do you realize that by this language here, you're basically blowing that out of the water and saying it doesn't apply in this case. Is that what you're saying? We don't have to abide by the Illinois Administrative Procedures Act in this case because you've decided to waive it in this bill?
Correct.
That's pretty darn.
Well, I mean, the attempt here is
Yeah, I
to
know what the
contain-
attempt is, ma'am, but the fact is that what you're doing is you're violating the Illinois Administrative Procedures Act through a unilateral act in this bill.
Well, let me also point out that there is a repeal date on here. This is to be able to spend the next year really understanding what this issue is and being able to contain the costs.
No, what we're doing here is we are finding ways to hide the way in which this money is going to be spent. And what we're doing is we're saying that we're going to pay out $1.1 billion over 12 months. We're going to cut it in half this year because we're not going to start till January. But in effect, what you're doing is you're saying we're going to find ways through the rulemaking process, which gives us the ability to make these payments without, basically under the cover of darkness. It's 12:39. We're talking about this bill. That's kind of apt. The problem is to the bill.
Disagree.
To the bill. Well, disagree all you want. To the bill. We just got done with 20-some months of disaster declarations by this governor. What we have here now is a reenactment of the same thing. He's issuing disaster declarations through the color of administrative rule. He's waiving the rule requirements that we all abide by when it comes to issuance of emergency rules. Those are there for a reason. When there is a true, honest-to-God emergency that deals with public interest, public welfare. This is not an emergency of a pandemic making. This is an emergency of the making of this administration for allowing this to happen. And therefore, what we're looking at is a unilateral suspension of the IAPA for the convenience of this governor and this administration. It's going to cost us an awful lot of money, and they're going to do it under the color of emergency rules, and they're waiving the rules in order to be able to do it. Vote no.